All right, welcome back to Placed on the 55. Each week, Jess and I discuss the upcoming games scheduled in the CFL and give you our picks with the spread. But before getting into week 8, how did we do last week, Jess, in week 7?
I started the week 13 and 11, heading into last Friday's doubleheader, with Ottawa holding off Edmonton 20-14. They covered that 2.5-point spread. And then Saskatchewan kept their home winning streak going by beating up the Bombers by an impressive 19-9 and easily covering that spread. I won those two games on Friday and was 15 and 11, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. Then Toronto got upset in Hamilton, 27-24, and then BC lost by a rouge in Calgary. And never mind, they had to cover a 4.5-point spread. They didn't even win the game. Finished the week 2-2. So overall, I finished 15 and 13 on the season so far. How did you fare last week, John?
Well, as you know, I'm now sitting at 13 and 15. I'm the reverse of you, Jess. I was pushing 0-3 coming out of Saturday's game, and it's as difficult to go 0-4 as 4-0. But luckily, Calgary, who I bet on, came out with the win. I didn't really like watching Calgary win, to be honest, even though I won the bet. I'm rooting for BC, and I think they're better than their second place position in the West. It feels like maybe the record is unfair to their actual results on the field.
I sort of agree, and as our listeners probably remember, I picked the Lions to win the Grey Cup. It's really good timing right now that the Lions have a bye going into this upcoming week. Vernon Adams has got some pain in his ribs or something, but like if they can just rest him just for a little bit and he gets a little more healthy, that's only going to help the Lions. So it's great timing for the bye for the Lions.
He looked uncomfortable on the bench and in between plays. The Elks, they changed it up. They got a new coach. They got a new GM, Roy Simon. They still lost that game. It wasn't enough for them to change their losing ways.
Chris Jones got relieved of his duties on last Monday afternoon, probably about a few hours after we recorded our podcast from last week. Realistically, Jarius Jackson only had maybe 2 days. So he gets the head coaching job on Monday afternoon. He's going to practice on Tuesday and Wednesday, and because on Thursday they're flying out to Montreal and then playing a game on Friday. Jarius maybe had a practice and a half to actually get his stamp on the Elks, and everyone was saying it wasn't enough time to have just 2 days between getting hired, coaching your first ever CFL game as a head coach. It's impossible, and had nothing to do with Jarius.
It seemed like Jarius didn't really know what to do with the team yet. He had MBT in the game in the first quarter and then out and then back in. And it'll be interesting to see how they do coming up in week 8 over there in Hamilton. But is there anything else from week 7 that sort of caught your eye or made news for you?
Other than I was really surprised that Toronto lost in Hamilton. Dukes has looked really good. We both, I think, lost that game. Toronto was 4.5-point favorites, I believe, and they lost the game by 3.
What I found surprising from that outcome was that previous 6-7 weeks, I was starting to believe that Dukes was a great quarterback, and they say, like, when your starter goes out and you bring in the backup, the best you can hope for is 50-50. And so right now, Toronto sits 3-3. Duke had a really hot start. They beat the BC Lions. And here we are at the end of week 7, and he's 50-50. We're only a couple weeks away now from Chad Kelly potentially coming back. Toronto might be 4-4 with Kelly standing on the sidelines at the start of week 10, and we'll get a real sense of what the Toronto team is with their starter and number 1 quarterback back on the field. There's another weird thing that I'm noticing now that I'm watching the CFL. It seems like every team has a player with a 0.
Players have been allowed to wear zeros. There was Les Brown, that was a cornerback for the BC Lions back in the mid-90s when they won the Grey Cup in 94. And I believe he wore 00.
00? Huh.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with like their first-year players or certain position. It's just they pick the 0 and that's it. They get to go with it.
I'm sort of out of my league on talking about this, but there is something to do with the number, especially in the NFL. Like if you're an offensive lineman, you wear a number in the 50s and 60s. If you are a receiver, you're wearing a number in the 80s. And it's not really a rule, but it's kind of like that's what you do. But in the CFL, like you got guys running around wearing number 3, playing receiver or whatever the case may be. And I kind of like that. I don't see a problem with it. 00 or even just 0 together is kind of a weird number. And therefore, I say that while I'm, sitting in front of my kid's BC Lion jersey that he wanted 99 on it. And I'm like, it's football. Like, it's going to sound like Wayne Gretzky. Are you sure you want to do that? And he's like, oh, yeah. For football, it's different. And he's right, because 99 would usually, or something in the 90s, would usually be a defensive linebacker that's going to, try and chase down the quarterback.
What I find pretty common is every time a penalty is called and a flag is thrown, it's always a 0 that gets the penalty. Before we head into week 8 and our predictions for the games, do you want to mention who our sponsor is?
Yeah, we have to take care of some business. This week's spreads are courtesy of Ed Fleming's Floating Sportsbook and Casino, which is now moored in an undisclosed location in the ocean off the coast of British Columbia. Now, because Fleming doesn't have his official permit yet to open his casino, he cannot advertise where he's actually moored. But we can say that Fleming's Floating Sportsbook and Casino is moored in a body of water that sounds maybe like the third best hockey player in NHL history. Regardless, when Fleming does get his approvals together, he can start serving customers on board, and I would imagine that would be great for his business.
The only thing worse than being on a cruise ship, Jess, is being on a cruise ship that doesn't leave dock.
Anyway, we thank Fleming for his support and for his spreads going into week 8. Starting off on Thursday, old Flemwad has the Rough Riders as 2.5-point underdogs going into Montreal to face the Alouettes at McGill. Both teams are 5-1, but Montreal's quarterback Cody Fajardo is officially out for this game. He hasn't practiced all week, and they say he's not playing. Saskatchewan looked good enough last week to beat the Bombers, and this will be a real test to see if the Riders are for real or not. I'm taking the Riders with 2.5 free points to start the game with.
So even with 2.5 points, you think that's enough for the mediocre Saskatchewan Roughriders to overcome?
Not overcome. They get a free 2.5 to start the game with.
Oh, they get the 2.5. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I love underdogs. If you can get an underdog you think is going to win the game and you start with free points kickoff, that's an awesome winning scenario.
Mediocre. They can't do it. Montreal's my bet. That's where my money's going. The second game of the week, where Calgary is visiting Ottawa. Calgary is considered the favorite in this game, and the spread is -1 for them. Is that right?
Yeah, Calgary are 1.5-point favorites in Ottawa. I like what the Stamps did last week versus BC, and I like them to beat the Red Blacks and clear that only 1.5-point spread. I think that's the easiest pick of the week for me.
This is the Pimpleton versus Bagleton game. I like Brown. I think Brown is playing really well. He's probably the main reason why they're 4-2 for the first time in forever. What, they win 4 games in total last season and 4 the year before. So they have a chance here to come out and be 5-2 to start the season. They're already second in the East, which I think is a pretty big surprise. I'm going to have to go with Ottawa. I think there's some momentum there. I think Brown's playing well. Pimpleton, he's going to make some big plays. Ottawa gets my money.
Okay. On Saturday, Winnipeg is favored by just a mere rouge over the Argos in Toronto. I like O'Shea, Claris, and company to bomb the boatmen into Lake Ontario. So yeah, I'm easily taking Winnipeg to beat Toronto, and I'll take that free point.
All right. I don't think Toronto's lost 2 games in a row yet this season, and I don't think this is going to be the game. Winnipeg had a chance last week to go 3-4, and they ended up 2-5, and 2-6 doesn't seem very far away from me. I think Toronto's going to right their ship. Dukes is going to have a good game. He seems to be a stronger quarterback running the ball than he is passing. I'm going to go Toronto. I think Toronto's just got a little bit more for this week, and they're going to finish 4-3 and give Winnipeg another loss on the season.
I know that Winnipeg, that's tough. Winnipeg is such a big question mark. Like they were kind of the odds-on favorite to come, or at least tied with BC to come out of the West and go to the Grey Cup. Yeah, and if they lose this game, they're going to easily be in third place at best in the West. And that's quite surprising, considering they almost won the Grey Cup last year.
Well, I think they're sitting fourth right now, and just a hair above Edmonton. Calgary looks like a better third place team.
Actually, yeah, you're right about that. They are a better third place team.
I wouldn't be surprised if I see it go BC, Calgary, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, Edmonton to finish the season in the West.
Number 5 in the West is pretty freaking easy to pick. So the rest. Speaking of those Edmontons, on Sunday we got your Tabbies, and the Tabbies are actually favored by 2.5 points in Edmonton. Edmonton is 0-6, and man, they gotta win at some point. And they're not as bad as a regular 16-team record would indicate. They've been really close. A lot of those Elk players, they have to know that they just got Chris Jones fired last week. And if things don't change, some of the players are going to be heading out the door next. They got to get it together. And I think they will. So I'm taking Edmonton.
So coming out of week 7, I again was on the wrong side of the Hamilton bet. It doesn't matter what I bet with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I am wrong. Hamilton, they're favored going into Edmonton, which is a surprise.
That is a surprise.
I mean, unless Tua's little brother is going to be slinging the ball, I could see them losing by a tiny amount, like a real nail biter, and you're kind of at the edge of your seat wondering if the Elks are going to finally win a game this season. We've gone against each other on the first 3, but I think on this fourth one, I'm going to agree that Edmonton is going to win. Jarius gets to celebrate. Some of those players get to feel good about themselves. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to go with Edmonton this week.
Edmonton really needs a win. You know, their fans are a little PO'd with what's going on there, and it's reflecting in the stands. So, you know, they got to get a couple of wins behind them, and hopefully they start this week for them.
I wonder, will it be MBT who's out there for Edmonton, or will Jarius make a big change?
I almost would like Jarius and you to buckle up and go out and play.
Of the 4 games, I think that's the one that I'm most interested in watching this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And all 4 games this week are super, super close, according to the bet makers. Like, what was the biggest spread was 2.5 points. Everything else is 1.5 or 1. It should be a great week for the Canadian Football League. I can't wait.
I was at that BC Lions game a few weeks ago now, and I was walking through the halls of BC Place, and I remembered years ago going to a game with you at Empire when they were doing the whole BC Place renovation.
Yeah, speaking of that time at Empire Field, I had season tickets that year, so that's probably why we went. I loved that environment at Empire Field. That's a full-on outdoor stadium. Like, sure, BC Place has got a hole in the roof, but it's not outdoors. Empire was outdoors.
That game was pretty special. The weather was amazing. At that time, in the early aughts, you were allowed to bring Wuvuzelas to the game. But I remember you and my wife freaking trumpeting away on that stupid thing and making a hell of a racket.
Yeah, the big CFL classic horn. I used to play it during O Canada when the anthem kind of goes true north, strong and free. Then it's like it's a dun da da. I would just do that with the horn going, and people all around would turn and laugh. Like, you know, I wasn't butchering the anthem. It was comical.
Those are our picks for week 8. At 15 and 13, we'll see where you end at the end of week 8. And hopefully I can climb out of this 13 and 15 hole and get back to 50-50 at least. Remember, if you want to write the show, you can at placedon the55pod@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll be back next week to go another 110 yards. Talk to you later, Jess.
You got it, John.